Think of a golf course. Now, there are such things as extreme golf played in mountainsides. They're not as popular as the kind played in a lovely green, but nevertheless, these are practices that have been constituted by the technological environment that has been created. These environments may change. Sports may change dramatically. Here we have a quite primitive now virtual reality simulator of golf. It's conceivable that this becomes a bigger part of what sports involve. Here we also have a story about Tiger Woods having had laser eye surgery. And again, the proposition here is that this is something that is perfectly legitimate to do within the sport of golf. There's no one to prevent Tiger from doing this, but it could arguably be having an unfair advantage for him in his performance. So why is that okay? Altitude chambers, you may have heard about these as well. This is an example of one. This is actually quite a primitive example as well. About 7 years ago, there was the beginnings of an inquiry about this, about whether they were ethical or not, whether athletes should be allowed to use these environments, whether they should be effectively banned from sports. At the time, everyone was, well, not everyone was using them, but a lot of people were using them. Paul Radcliffe, David Beckham. These were technologies that people felt, what's the big deal? It's fine, isn't it? And then there was a big inquiry about whether they should be allowed. And you can see how someone might look at that and think, it doesn't seem very nice for an athlete who should be out running in one of these environments all day, every day, which isn't quite what they do. But nevertheless, it conjures up this idea. Rather than, you might remember the images of Michael Jackson many years ago when he was in his chamber and how that was talked about in the press. Today, they're like hotel suites. You know, you can go to high-voltage chambers that are pretty much like regular environments. And so the idea that this technology is somehow abhorrent is changing over time. And I think that process of change is something that's central here. Equally, the technology develops and the discussions develop with it. In 2005, I think this book came out, Beyond Therapy, published by the United States President's Council on Bioethics. And it spoke a lot about genetic modification in sport, which became quite a big issue in 2001, 2002, when scientists were beginning to say, athletes are contacting us, seeing if they can help us genetically modify. And no one could really help them with that, but nevertheless, there was a culture of expectation beginning to grow, and the science was beginning to show results. So in this case, IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which has been worked on by Lee Sweeney in Philadelphia. He spent a lot of time looking into this. This is a medical scientist that's trying to address muscle wasting diseases. And the very same science that he's working on could have an application that could allow an athlete to improve their muscle functionality. Now, a lot of this science is contested because people have not done the experiments to know whether it would work. But the world of sport is assuming that it's possible, if not probable. And to that extent, it's taking it very seriously over the last 5 years, investing heavily into methods that would utilize genetic technologies to help detect this kind of modification. And I think Yanis will talk a little bit about that. But so these public inquiries have taken place across the water. And the debate about how, oh, by the way, I should point out, this is as you can perfectly tell, this is a rat effectively pulling a weight up a ladder, and the experiment here is trying to ascertain whether injections of IGF-1 are going to affect the performance capability of this animal. And Lee will say that, in fact, the injection alone may have a bit of an effect, but if you combine that with training, then the animal can really have a significant advantage to their performance. Because, I mean, you know, it's not competing against anything, but nevertheless, it is able to perform better than otherwise. So this debate has become part of that public imagination. This is an image of Cheetah Man by the artist Daniel Lee. And again, it occupies that terrain where people imagine what this world might look like if we allow this kind of technological modification. I think we need to be kind of critical of those views. But nevertheless, it becomes part of that debate. The reason why doping is such a big issue is because every week there are stories in the newspapers reporting on it. And it's a classic hero-villain story. So they continually regurgitate themselves and become part of people's imaginations. With genetic modification and with a number of technologies, these concerns are broader than sport, I think. They have to do with the way, the direction that society is taking. Genetic enhancement in sport may lead to, or indeed may derive from, genetic enhancements outside of it. So all of these different individuals from their very different perspectives identify and have been asked to comment on this prospect. And in this case, I think gene technology can be a metaphor for other technologies, because of course everyone thinks about, well, what comes after genetics? What will be the next technology that we focus on and think about in a utopian or dystopian way? And this is the kind of moral imposition that is brought to bear on this doping issue. But it's brought to bear, I think, sometimes for legitimate reasons. In 2004, a test for a performance gene was launched. This is a couple of images from the brochure. And the idea is you take a mouth swab, it tells you whether you're more likely to be an endurance athlete or a power-based athlete. It doesn't say you're going to be a gold medal winner, but it kind of says you've got a bigger proportion of this muscle fiber versus the other. You may wish to focus on one or the other. And this became quite a significant concern to the world of sport, and you can see why. You've got an image of young kids at a sports day suggesting that these children should be tested and perhaps they should make decisions on that basis. And we may question whether that's a reasonable thing to do. All of these technologies are transforming what we think of as ability or disability, and indeed the kind of credit and reward that we give to achievements. But equally, it may also be simply dispelling the myth that in fact athletes reach that podium on their own and are entirely justified in claiming that medal for themselves. We see increasing ways in which that distinction between ability and disability may be challenged. This is a couple of shots, one's from an ESPN feature, the other's from Nick Knight, the photographer, both successful Paralympians, athletes who are redefining the aesthetic of disability, but also interrogating how we ought to think about it. So whilst we still live in a world where after the Olympics is finished, and that interim period between that and the Paralympics, 80% of the media leave and go home, the rest are left to deal with the Paralympics. We still live in a society where, globally, athletes with disabilities are not valued as well as so-called able-bodied athletes. But this is something that is perhaps subject to change, and it might change as a result of someone like Oscar Pistorius, who has campaigned to be part of the Olympics as well as the Paralympics. And we may see him in London achieving that. And again, anyone that's been to the Paralympics or seen athletes with disabilities before, you can see how there is no sense of this segregation outside of the notion that there may be something different going on in performance, but that's something that really needs to be proven before people can be excluded from the sports. There are suggestions that some interventions on people have an effect on them that leads them effectively to become better than human. So this is one example, Tommy John surgery, which takes place on baseball pitches, and the claim here is that once the athlete gets the injury, they go through the therapy, they return to the playing field, that they perform better than before they were injured. We don't really know why that's the case, and the evidence is really sketchy, but the proposition here is that the surgical intervention, along with the therapy, might actually allow an athlete to become better than what is humanly capable. And you can see what direction this may take as you get into more synthetic modifications to people, synthetic tendons and so on. So we might be able to reinforce the body, not just for sports performances, but for a range of performances generally. Where does this leave us? I think that there are a few things that are sacrificed along the way. Some of them we may not be too concerned about at all. We sacrifice the illusion that sports performances are simply about natural talent. The fact that genetic luck still determines, at least in part, performance achievements is one reason why we ought to pursue their eradication. So we should get rid of genetic luck, allow people the capacity to get themselves up to the level of others.